Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that thousands of people hate you. They have judged you as an evil narcissist. They talk about your clothing, your hair, your sex life, what you spend your money on. They have legitimately decided who you are, but they've never met you. They've never spoken to you, but they've read through enough posts, watched enough commentary, and shared in enough rumors that they're certain they know what kind of a person you are. Welcome to social media. Well, wait a minute. Welcome to Versailles, 1785. This is Say It to My Face, a podcast about the idiocy on the internet. I'm MaryAnna. Pull up a bar stool, turn on your Bluetooth, cover your kids' ears. This is episode 5. The Queen had no Twitter. All right, so here's where it gets fun. For years leading up to the actual beheading of Marie Antoinette, there was an overarching pettiness and cruelty that we would all recognize from our thrones of judgment in 2026. This pettiness and hate was on printed paper, though, not the comment section. It was passed around from hand to hand, and it was sold on street corners for a few coins. This is 18th century France, and the papers were called libels. It's all cute and fun and games on Bridgerton, but these printed accusations in the 18th century were a part of the reason at least one queen got her head cut off. And her friend, sadly, who went before her, also got her head cut off. But let me not get ahead of myself. A libel was a small, cheap, printed pamphlet. The term originally just meant little book, but by the mid 1700s, it had come to mean something closer to a hit piece, a defamatory attack on a public figure, a genre defined by brief and defamatory attacks on pre-revolutionary French public figures. They weren't new to the 1700s. Similar libels had circulated during the French Wars of Revolution in the 1580s and again during the civil wars of the Fronde in the 1640s and 50s, when the pamphlets went after Cardinal Mazarin's birth and private life. What changed in the 18th century is that the target shifted. It shifted from attacking individual rivals to going after entire institutions, such as the church, the aristocracy, and the monarchy itself. Format-wise, they weren't one thing. Libels could be flyers, broadsheets, pamphlets, scripts, essays, or even cartoon collections. The only constant was that the content was slanderous. Some of the serious ones were even dressed up to look like real journalism. Now, libels could go after anyone: ministers, mistresses, cardinals, whoever was powerful enough to be worth destroying. She was born the Archduchess of Austria, then became queen through her marriage to Louis XVI. Now, Louis was the reigning king when Marie arrived in France in 70. In fact, he was her husband's grandfather. Marie married the grandson, Louis Auguste, while he was still just the Dauphin, which is the crown prince, not yet king. He only became Louis XVI in 1774 when Louis XV died and the throne passed to him, which is the exact moment that Marie went from Dauphine to queen. Before 79, she wasn't even the primary target. This is based on Robert Darnton's research. Robert Darnton is an American cultural historian and one of the leading scholars of the 18th century France, and the author of the book, The Devil in the Holy Water, or The Art of Slander, from Louis XVI to Napoleon. In fact, this author has more than 30 years of research on this subject. So my rendition is a micro look into an enormous body of work. Anyway, Darnton's research found out that 10% of pornographic libels were aimed at Marie before the revolution broke out. After 1789, however, the vast majority of the libels were directed toward Marie. So we went from 10% to the vast majority. Darnton, the historian on the subject, called the volume of material aimed at Marie an avalanche of defamation with no parallel in the history of vilification. Marie was given a nickname that I can't pronounce, but it's a nasty little pun meaning the Austrian woman, but doubles as Austrian bitch since the word in her nickname is French for a female dog. The hate for Marie started before she had done anything wrong. She was legit just 14 years old when she arrived in France in 1770. But she married into a wildly unpopular French Austrian alliance that plenty of the French public already resented. So she started with a target on her back just for existing. And then in 1785, something happened that had nothing to do with her but ruined her anyway. A con artist named Jean de la Motte, who had never even met the queen, convinced a cardinal that Marie Antoinette secretly wanted an obscenely expensive diamond necklace. But she needed the cardinal to buy it for her quietly. So then Jean forged the queen's signature on letters. She even hired a prostitute who looked like Marie Antoinette to meet the cardinal in a garden at night in the dark so that he'd believe he had gotten royal approval in person. So then the cardinal goes out, he buys this necklace on credit, and then he hands it over to the queen's people, who were really just Jean and her husband. And then the con artist, Jean and her husband, broke the necklace apart and sold the diamonds on the black market. So when the bill came for the necklace and no one paid it, the whole scheme collapsed. But here's the part that matters. Marie Antoinette had nothing to do with any of it. She had never met Jean or her husband. She didn't even want the necklace. In fact, she had turned it down years earlier, reportedly saying that the money would be better spent on battleships. Marie was, if anything, the victim of the con, not the perpetrator. It didn't matter. The public had already decided who she was. So when the story broke, most of Paris didn't hear that the queen got conned. They heard, oh, of course she did something shady. Look at her. The trial found Marie had not participated in the scheme, and the public convicted her anyways. Let's repeat that. So the trial cleared her, but the public convicted her anyway. And Jean didn't just get away with it in people's minds, she profited from it twice. Because after Jean escaped from prison, she fled to London and published a memoir, in her own words, blaming the entire thing on Marie Antoinette. She was quite bold, was she not? Fate or karma intervened, and Jean died 2 years later when she fell from a third-story window in London. But while she was running from bailiffs, she thought were French agents come to arrest her or silence her. When she fell from the window, she broke her arm, her leg, knocked out an eye, and then died weeks later from the injuries. That's a tough way to go. Some people think it was an accident, some think she was pushed, but nobody actually knows. And by then, it didn't really matter. She had already lit the match. The libels took it from there. The accusations against Marie escalated from wasteful spending to full pornographic fantasy. She was depicted as insatiable, unsatisfied by the king, and seeking partners among his brother, court nobles, servants, and even her own children. Can you imagine being accused of using your own children for fornication? I can't. The wildness is beyond me. But, given the current state of social media, nothing much has changed in our human quest toward cruelty. So, why were women mostly vilified in this time period? Because men weren't treated similar. In fact, Louis XV, by comparison, who was the King of France from 1715 to 1774, and Marie's grandfather-in-law, was also portrayed in libels, but he was simply portrayed as a womanizer, uninterested in state affairs. This is a much softer treatment than what came from Marie, and Louis this was mocked mainly for supposed impotence and incompetence as a ruler, while Marie Antoinette was hit with obvious pornographic material and a level of hate and cruelty that is largely unbeaten. Women were targeted in that era. Well, let's be real. Has there ever been an era where women haven't been targeted? Like, what's the payoff to being a woman, anyways? I digress. The answer is uncomfortable because there really hasn't been an era free of woman bashing. Every culture has some version of if a woman has power, go for her body, her sex life, her worth as a woman, not her actual decisions. And that's not me being cynical, that's just literally what history shows. But I digress again. Before Marie Antoinette became the libel's favorite target, it was Madame du Barry, Louis's the 15th's mistress. She took the brunt of it. She had been born to an unmarried seamstress, worked her way up, and once she had power, the pamphlets tore her apart for it, painting her as a scheming, sex crazed manipulator using her body to control the king. Historians who have actually dug into it say the real story doesn't match the myth, but the myth is what stuck because the myth is what sold. And it wasn't just France. Russia's Catherine the Great, one of the most effective rulers in her country's history, got the same treatment. Catherine the Great was portrayed as having an insatiable, almost pathological sexual appetite. And when she died, the rumor that immediately started circulating wasn't about her decades of actual governance. It was that she died having sex with a horse. That rumor is still one of the first things half of the internet, quote, knows about her today, over 200 years later. What actually happened is that Catherine collapsed from a stroke in a bathroom at the Winter Palace in 1796. She fell into a coma and died in her bed the next day at just age 67. Did you know they were doing autopsies back in the 1700s? I didn't either. Anyway, they did an autopsy on Catherine, and the court officials, physicians, and witnesses all documented her death. Historians consider her actual cause of death one of the least disputed facts about her entire life. So, where did the wild horse sex accusation come from then? Well, Queen Catherine genuinely loved horses. She was an accomplished equestrian and she rode competitively. She even entered St. Petersburg on horseback as a symbol of her power right after seizing the throne in a coup. That's the one true thread. Everything else got built on top of it by people who were threatened by her. Since she had taken the throne through a coup, expanded the empire, modernized Russia, and won wars, then the rumor tracks straight back to European rivals and to French cartoonists who ramped up the mockery specifically after she came out against the French Revolution. Male rulers of the era had plenty of documented affairs, and nobody built bestiality myths around their deaths. Catherine had roughly 22 lovers over her lifetime who were real and documented, and the response wasn't that she had too many relationships. No, the response and the gossip was she must be so depraved that even a human wasn't enough. That escalation to the absurd is identical to what was built around Marie Antoinette. The accusations don't stop at true and embarrassing. They keep climbing until they hit impossible and grotesque, because impossible and grotesque is what actually sticks and spreads. You know the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So here's the pattern. It doesn't matter what country, what century, or what the women actually did. If she has power, the fastest way to destroy her isn't to attack her policies. It's to make her disgusting. Du Barry, Catherine the Great, Marie Antoinette, 3 different women, 3 different countries, same freaking cruel gossip. The libels even attacked Marie's closest friend, the Princess de Lamballe, who had returned from the safety of being abroad. She came home to stand by and support her friend Marie. Now, the princess had been accused of being Marie's lesbian lover. So then she was imprisoned separately from Marie, and after a while, she was dragged out by a mob who beat her to death, allegedly had her genitals cut from her body, and then quartered her, and then carried her head to Marie Antoinette's cell window so that Marie could see it. The mob believed the lies that pamphleteers had written, and the pamphleteers kept publishing libelous material about the princess even after she was dead. I mean, That's the real cause of just a smear campaign. It doesn't stay contained to the original target. They started with Marie, they moved to the princess, and 2 women lost their heads. So, what are the consequences for the assholes basically making this shit up? The official threat for lying pamphlets was hanging. The crown issued a decree declaring that anyone caught producing these pamphlets would be hanged. That's how seriously the monarchy took it. It didn't stop production, of course. It just pushed the whole business further underground and across the channel, with printers and writers relocating to London and Holland to work from a safe distance. The Bastille was a massive medieval fortress in Paris, originally built in the 1370s and 80s as a military stronghold. It was built to defend the city's eastern gate during the 100 Years' War. But by the 1600s and 1700s, the building had been repurposed into a state prison, and not a normal one. It held people imprisoned by direct royal order, often without a trial, often without a set sentence, and sometimes without even the prisoner being told why. This is where the crown, through the writers, the printers, and the booksellers, they wanted silenced. So the people that were writing the libels. For example, Voltaire, who is a famous banned writer, was actually in that prison twice, as was several of the pamphleteers that we've been talking about. And it wasn't reserved for hardened criminals. It was reserved for people who had embarrassed or threatened the monarchy, which obviously included the libel writers. So on July 14, 1789, a Paris mob stormed the Bastille. That's the event Bastille Day commemorates and is generally treated as the symbolic start of the French Revolution. The irony is that they weren't liberating some huge population of political prisoners. There was literally 7 inmates left inside that day, none of them famous at that point. What they were really after was the gunpowder stored there. But symbolically, storming the building where the crown locks up people who talk too much became the moment the revolution took for its resounding call. So this famous prison was full of writers when it was really 7 of them. But keep in mind, the crown ran actual spy operations against the libellees. French agents tried to lure exiled pamphleteers back across the border just so they could arrest them. One operation successfully lured the writer Anne Giron de la Fête de la Pourpre, author of a libel that had exposed a royal spy. So he and his associate were lured back to France, where they were both thrown in the Bastille. In 1786, agents were sent to Britain with a plan to possibly kidnap or even murder a fugitive connected to the diamond necklace affair. Some of the crown's own spies were arrested too for secretly profiting off of the libels that they were supposed to be suppressing, which basically tells you everyone in this ecosystem was a little dirty. Again, nothing new, right? Here's the thing. Most recent historians, Simon Burroughs specifically, argue the crackdown actually worked, at least on the specific Marie Antoinette pamphlets. Only about 5 titles targeting her were known to have existed before 1789, and several of those were locked up in the Bastille itself, like the literal pamphlets were locked up in the Bastille. And there's no solid evidence any of them really circulated publicly before the revolution. So the mass avalanche everyone associates with her reputation may have actually circulated after 1789, including, in a wild detail, because the revolutionary mob literally liberated the suppressed pamphlets when they stormed the Bastille to free the 7 prisoners. Does that make sense? So they go in there, here's the pamphlets, they're probably in some storage room. Nobody's really seen them. And then they free these 7 prisoners. And when they do, now these people have access to these pamphlets that hadn't necessarily circulated previously. So that's a real historical debate. It's not settled fact per se, Darden's version is that the pamphlet built for years poisoned public opinion and helped cause the revolution, versus Burroughs' version that the state was actually pretty effective at suppression and the flood came after the fact, possibly the revolution's result more than its cause. Whew, confusing, right? So, why women? I mean, honestly, obviously, this is a podcast about women, mostly for women. I'm sure that we have a few male listeners out there, but for the most part, this is by women for women. So, here's something that should bother you a little more than it probably does. Louis XVI got mocked. Marie Antoinette got obsessed over. They were from the same monarchy, they were from the same government, they had the same failed policies. Honestly, Louis XVI signed off on plenty of it. But the pamphlets weren't drawing him having sex with half of Versailles. They weren't dissecting what he wore, who he was friends with, or whether he was a good father. They saved all of that for Marie. Because when society wants to destroy a powerful man, it goes after his decisions. But when society wants to destroy a powerful woman, it goes after her body, her clothes, her friendships, who she's sleeping with, what kind of a mother she is. Marie Antoinette wasn't just accused of bad politics. She was accused of orgies. She was accused of incest. She was accused of being a bad mother to her own children. None of it was about policy or her ideas or what she basically had actually put into place. Sound familiar? All of it was about creating a persona for her that was disgusting, because it's easier to make people hate than it is to be honest about life and people. And humans, for some reason, are wired for gossip and innuendo and drama. So, what is your modern version of this? Because I'm sure we all have our own examples. In fact, you may be the example that you're listening to right now. But watch what happens the next time a woman runs for president versus the next time a man does. He gets asked about his tax plan. She gets asked about her marriage, her tone of voice, whether she's likable, what she's wearing, whether she smiled enough. Hillary Clinton's hairstyle got more media coverage across her career than most male senators' entire voting records. That's not a coincidence. That's the same libel machine 400 years later without handing people a piece of paper. Humans are wired to criticize and shit on women. I do not get it. But let's finish the story, because the pamphlets don't stay background noise forever. Eventually, they walk into a courtroom. And by August of 1793, Marie Antoinette was moved out of the Temple prison and into the Conciergerie, the place Parisians openly called the antechamber to the guillotine, because almost nobody who went in came back out. Now, keep in mind that Louis XVI was tried separately, and this would have been Marie's husband. He was tried separately and executed actually before Marie was. He was tried and convicted of treason for conspiring against the liberty of the nation and the security of the state. And the evidence that really sealed the deal was an iron safe discovered hidden in the walls of the palace. And in the safe was secret correspondence and proof that Louis XVI had been in contact with foreign powers and hostile factions. He had actively worked against the revolution while publicly pretending to accept it as a constitutional monarch. So that's the biggest difference. His charges were rooted in actual documentary evidence in the form of actual letters, while a huge chunk of what convicted Marie was just recycled gossip and a coerced statement from her child. So Louis was convicted by the convention itself. It was a fairly narrow majority on the death sentence. And he was executed by guillotine 6 days later in front of a crowd of about 20,000 people. Louis XVI was given a closed carriage to take him to the scaffold where he would lose his head. Marie, however, was given an open cart and paraded in front of the macabre onlookers to the scaffold. They both got the same death sentence, but they certainly had different levels of public humiliation on the way to the guillotine. Marie's trial started October 14th. She and her lawyers got less than a day to prepare her defense. The prosecutor, a man named Foyer Tinville, is the one who actually stood up and demanded her head by name, Marie Antoinette, in front of the tribunal. The charges were the same tired gossip recycled over and over and over again, and now presented as actual evidence in a court of law. He used information from the libels accusing her of treason, of sending millions to Austria, and of orchestrating orgies at Versailles. Then, when the case started falling apart, Marie was accused of incest with her own 8-year-old son. They had taken Louis Charles from her months earlier and handed him to a jailer. The child was isolated, abused, and pressured into signing a statement accusing his own mother of incest. Foyer Tinville read the charge out loud. It's the one moment Marie Antoinette's composure actually broke. Marie snapped and says, "Did you witness it?" and then refused to say anything more. When the judge pushed her, she said, "If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge laid against a mother." And she turned and appealed straight to every mother sitting in that courtroom. It worked for only a second. Some of them called out for the trial to stop, but it didn't matter. The verdict had already been decided before she walked in that door. Guilty, in the early hours of October 16th. They cut her hair, tied her hands behind her back, and put her in an open cart and drove her through the streets to her own death. Marie's last words actually weren't a speech about her innocence or a final political statement, but actually when she stepped on the executioner's foot while she was climbing the scaffold, she said, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." And then the blade fell at 12:15 in the afternoon. Marie was only 37 years old. 37. So here's where I land on all of this. We like to act like we're totally evolved past Versailles, like the guillotine and the pornographic pamphlets were a horrifying relic of a less civilized time and that we'd never do that now. But modern Americans do it every day. We just don't call it a libel pamphlet anymore. We only have to look in the comments section of almost any social media app. And the comments section has the same ingredients. So what did Marie Antoinette do that allowed people to believe the most outrageous things about her? I mean, where there's a little bit of smoke, there's fire, and that's what makes it easy to believe bullshit about people. She was a reckless spender. So apparently while France was starving, she was out spending money on lavish jewelry. She was wearing the latest fashions, and she had heavy gambling debts. Definitely something worth being critical of, especially in this time. So the nickname Madame Deficit was because they really thought that she was the reason that France was buckling under all of the debt, right? It was actually decades and decades of war debt. But it doesn't help that she was dressed to the nines and out gambling while everyone else was having such a hard time. She was politically tone deaf, that is a fact. So while she was playing like she was living some simple farm life in her mock village, ordinary French people were literally going hungry, genuinely bad optics. And then she had real political interference. So she would push for appointments and decisions that favored Austrian interests in a country that already hated the Austrian alliance. So that was a real political error. And then Marie Antoinette was personally cold and she played favorites. She had a tight inner circle. She would freeze people out at court. She had real enemies from real behavior, right? Enemies who had every reason to let the pamphlets run wild once the public started to turn on her. And so it was easy to pile on, so to speak. It was easy to make the claims even more outrageous than they already were. None of that adds up to the orgies that she was accused of, the incest that she was accused of, or the treason that she was accused of. That gap is literally the whole reason that it's easy to become a part of the mob mentality. It's very easy to say, oh, this Facebook post says this, even though there's absolutely no proof behind it. There's no court documents. And by the way, just so everybody understands, court documents, just because something was filed in court, doesn't actually make it true either. There are steps and due processes to everything. And I wanted to kind of bring in something modern that would give you an idea of the outrageousness, right? So there was a case of Cardi B, the rapper, versus a content creator named Tasha K. So starting around 2018, Tasha K began posting YouTube videos claiming that Cardi B was a prostitute, that she had used cocaine, that she had herpes, that she cheated on her husband, and during Cardi's pregnancy, that her baby might be born with intellectual disabilities. Tasha K eventually built her audience to over 1 million subscribers. So Cardi B took her to court. So Cardi B decided to sue her, right? She sent multiple cease and desist letters to Tasha K before she ever filed in court. Tasha K basically ignored them and kept posting. And then only after the warnings were disregarded did Cardi B finally file a lawsuit in March of 2019. So she wasn't just trying to sue someone as her first move. It was basically a last resort after direct, repeated steps were ignored. So then they end up going to trial. So the trial started January of 2022, and Tasha K tried to defend the claims as if they were true. However, the receipts that she brought to the table, they didn't hold up. The jury deliberated only a few hours and found Tasha K liable on all 3 counts: defamation, invasion of privacy, false light, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And Tasha K even admitted that she knew some of the content was fake, but she said she wanted the money and she wanted the ratings. The damages for Tasha K ended up being $1.25 million in general damages, $1.5 million in punitive damages, and $1.3 million in attorney fees. This is about $4 million total. And the verdict was affirmed on appeal in 2023, and a later bankruptcy attempt to discharge the debt was rejected, leaving her on the hook for $3.4 million even post-bankruptcy. So a lot of people think that just because someone is a public figure or that they put themselves out there, they think that they're like fair game to just make shit up about. They don't do their due diligence. They don't check into things. They don't verify anything. They don't post actual receipts. And why are you looking into someone's private life like this anyways? But that's a different conversation. So Cardi B is about as public a figure as it gets, right? She's a Grammy winner. She has a massive platform. The law does hold public figures to a higher bar, and they have to prove actual malice, that the speaker knew it was false or recklessly disregarded the truth, not just that it was false. Does that make sense? For example, there was also a psychic who was taken to court for claiming that a woman killed the 4 Idaho students in Idaho. This psychic kept making videos, kept trashing this woman's name, and this woman sent cease and desist letters as well. She did not go to court very first thing. She tried other avenues. She ended up being awarded $10 million from a psychic because this psychic kept saying that she had had an inappropriate relationship with one of the students, and that in order to cover up that relationship, she killed all 4 of them. And it sounds wildly bizarre, but this is what's going on. And because these are content creators, they think somehow they're above actually speaking the truth. The higher bar isn't no bar, though, and a jury still found for Cardi B unanimously that specific, knowingly false statements about a public figure crossed the line into defamation. And this wasn't opinion, it wasn't a fair commentary, it was actionable lying, and Cardi B was awarded a $4 million price tag. It is not true that just because someone is making content that you can go online and start making shit up about that person. So for Tasha K, even after losing, even after being in debt to the tune of $1 million because of this lawsuit, Tasha K kept using names like Cold Sore B and posted no lies were told on anyone. So she is not only lying and was convicted in a court of law and now has to spend $4 million. But she then doubled down even after a jury and an appellate court both said she's liable. They made it easy to target Marie Antoinette and enjoy the fact that she was about to lose her head because they believed all this shit about her. They're mostly anonymous people with cheap instant distribution and their dopamine hit of hate, except now it's free and it takes half a second instead of a printing press and a smuggling route across the channel. And the audience rewards the most outrageous versions of the story, not the truest one. They truly reward the most outrageous versions of any story. And they never seem to ask, what started this? What was the impetuous? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? What is the other side of the story? And the targets never get to speak in their own defense because the verdict has already been decided by people who have never even met the person, right? You see it literally. I was on Facebook the other day. It was some of the most vile accusations I have ever seen by people who have never even met the person they are accusing. Marie Antoinette never got a chance to say that's not true either. She got a trial after the damage was already done, and the trial didn't matter because by then everyone had already decided who she was. That's the whole thesis of this episode. Rarely does anyone say it to your face. They say it in a pamphlet, they say it in a comment section, they say it from an account without a name on it, to a person who will never get the chance to look them in the eye and ask them why they are choosing cruelty over compassion, or even over curiosity. Where's your curiosity to see if what you are repeating is even true? Marie Antoinette didn't get a choice in any of this. She didn't choose the marriage, she didn't choose the nickname, and she sure as hell didn't choose the gossip in the pamphlets. But you do choose this. Every single day, you get to choose whether you're the person passing around made up gossip or the person who stops and asks if it's even true. You get to choose whether you engage in defamation or if you walk away or if you attempt to bring sense to a conversation. The percentage of people asking if anything is true before judging is shockingly small. The pattern's always been there. It's been there in 1785, it's here right now, and apparently it's human nature and not going anywhere. But how you respond to other people's cruel human nature, that part still belongs to you. That part is who you get to be inside. That part is who you get to be when no one is looking. How you respond is a choice. Choose wisely. I'm MaryAnna. This has been Say It to My Face. See you online.